everyone, thank you so much for joining me for today's video, which is of course the best video of the month. That's because we'll be playing our monthly TBR game, this time for the month of December, the last month of 2025. And that, to me, is crazy. I am ready to see what books we'll be getting on our December TBR, but before we do that, let's quickly go through what happened in November, which was I have not completed any books on my November TBR so far. I have decided that the main reason I am having trouble completing my TBRs is because I play a bunch of monthly reading games each month where I read books not on my TBR. So what I am going to do is, starting in January, one of my weekly reading games is going to be dedicated to my TBR, so I can at least knock out 3 to 4 books in that weekly video. So we're going to see how that works for me starting in 2026. But getting back to November, these were some of the books on my November TBR. The only one I will complete by the end of the month is The Infinity Alchemist, which I am probably about a third of the way through. And then from the books we pulled from jars, I will have completed Jane Eyre and The Atlas Paradox by the end of the month as well. So 3 out of 10 books, not the greatest, but that's okay. It's time to move on to our December TBR and see what books we'll potentially be reading in December. So let's pull up our game board. We're going to put down all our tokens and then we'll go ahead and do our first roll. All right, here we are back on our game board. First things first, let's get our tokens down and see what the game board is going to look like for December. Alright, here is our December game board. Not terrible. We have a bunch of Time for Vacation tokens right over there, but other than that, things seem to be well spaced out. So let's go ahead and see how this game goes. Alright, roll number 1 is a 6. And that's brown. All right, roll number 1 did not go too bad. We rolled a 6, which is great, and we landed on brown, which is my favorite color for this game. And that is because in our brown bag here, the browns for the owl, we have our prompts that change every month. So for this month, we have prompts that have to do with December, fall, and the 2 astrological signs in December, which are Sagittarius and Capricorn. So let's go ahead and see what our first prompt is going to be. All right, let's mix these up real quick. All right, and then let's split the deck. How about right here? And this will be our first prompt for December. Here we go. So it's a prompt that has to do with December. And it is a book that starts with the letter X, Y, or Z. Those are not the easiest letters, but let's look at and see what we got. Okay, I have no books that start with X, Y, or Z, so we're going to have to pull a second prompt. So let's do that. All right, starting this game off well. Attempt number 2 to get a prompt that I can actually complete. All right, let's split the deck here. This time we have a fall prompt, autumn, and it is trees or leaves on the cover. That seems much more doable. So let's go ahead and find a book that matches this prompt. All right, so for my physical book option for a tree on the cover, I'm going to go with Silver on the Tree by Suzanne Cooper, which is a middle grade series. It's also the last book in the series, which is the Dark is Rising sequence. You can see there's a little tree here. So I'm very excited to get a middle grade book on here because they are usually easy reads. I'm also super excited to potentially end a series at the end of 2025. That seems like a perfect month to do it in. Like I said, this is a middle grade series that follows a group of children, and the basis of the entire series is good fighting evil. In this case, it's the light versus the dark, and this is going to kind of complete the story. So I'm excited to see what happens and excited to see the final battle in the book series. So this will be our physical book option. For our Kindle book option, I'm going to go with Christmas at the Lakeside Resort. Yeah, I know that the prompt is technically fall, but it is December. I want to get some holiday reads on, so this seemed like the perfect opportunity. And there are trees on the cover, so it's still, I guess you'll see better up there. It still fits the prompt, so yay. So this book follows Jenny, whose fiance has just left her. She also got kicked out of the cottage that she was living in, so not having, a great time. when she finds out that she has inherited 8 cozy cottages, and she ends up hiring a contractor to help her get the cottages ready for the holiday festive events that she has promised her first guests. Of course, during this, there is a blizzard, and her contractor Luke end up getting snowed in, and things go from there. So a fun little holiday romance to start off our December TBR with. All right, I think that's off to a strong start. We have 2 good book choices for our very first prompt of the game. Let's go ahead, bring up the game board, and do our second roll. All right, roll number 2 is a 7. And that is red. All right, a 7. Things are just moving along so well, and we landed on red, which corresponds to the pink bag back here. All right, so in here, we have prompts that have to do with titles of the books, and then we have some miscellaneous and some serious prompts as well. So let's go ahead, see what we get for our second prompt of the game. I'm loving this. All right, let's split the deck here. And we have a title prompt. And it is a title with a word related to reading. So we can definitely manage to find a book that meets this prompt. All right, so the physical book option I'm going to go for this prompt is The Untold Story by Genevieve Cogman. We got story in the title that has to do with reading, so fits the prompt. This is also a final book in a series, which is amazing. I could knock off 2 series this month if I read this book and Silver on the Tree. This is the 7th book in the Invisible Library series, which is a fun kind of cozy fantasy, alternative history fantasy book that follows the main character, who is a librarian at the Invisible Library. And her job is to kind of find these books on different universes, different Earths, and bring them back to the library. And the reason that they do that is to balance the magic of the dragons and the fae and try to prevent basically catastrophes. So the main character always finds herself in the middle of the battle between the fae and the dragons, and it's always fun to kind of see how she figures out how the messes that she finds herself in. So this will be our physical book prompt, or our physical book for our prompt. And then for our Kindle book, I could only find one book that met this prompt, and that is Bookends by Jane Green, book being in the title. And this book follows 2 best friends who are kind of polar opposites of each other. And they live in London along with their married lifelong friends and those friends' child, when all of a sudden another college friend, Portia, ends up showing up in their lives, and some of the things that she kind of does causes kind of chaos and threatens these friends' friendship, basically. So that is the story. That is the little synopsis of the story, at least. So we'll add this book to our TBR as well. All right, another 2 good options. I'm excited so far. Let's go ahead, bring up the game board and do our third roll. All right, we are moving along. Let's do roll number 3, see what we get. Another 7. And that is orange. We are just getting all high numbers. This is amazing. We rolled a 7 this time and we landed on orange. This is our orange bag. In here we have prompts that have to do with the cover of the book, the miscellaneous prompts, and the series prompts as well. So let's go ahead and see what we get for our third prompt of the game. All right, let's cut the deck here. This will be our prompt. Looks like it's a cover prompt. And it is a cover with writing that's not horizontal. So we basically have to find a cover that has writing that's either diagonal or vertical. Hopefully this is not too difficult. I guess we're going to find out. All right, I did find 2 options for this. The first is another middle grade book called Keeper of the Lost Cities, which is the first book in a very long series. But you can see on the cover, Shannon Messenger is on a diagonal, so it fits our prompt. So this book follows 12-year-old Sophie, who has a secret, and that secret is she is a telepath. And can hear the thoughts of everyone around her. One day, she ends up meeting a mysterious boy named Fitz who has the same power as she does, and she starts to learn some things, including where she does belong, and she's forced to leave behind everything and start a new life in a place that is vastly different from her own. So that is an option. Our second option is 8 Nights of Flirting by Hannah Reynolds. You can see 8 Nights of Flirting is on a slant as well, so it definitely meets our prompt. This book is a Hanukkah holiday story that follows two characters, Tyler and Shira, and they kind of make this pact where Tyler agrees to give flirting lessons to Shira, and Shira is going to give career connections to Tyler. And that's kind of the beginning of the story. Another holiday romance book. I really want to read both of these. This book will actually meet one of the hard prompts on, what's it called? On the Fantasy Reddit Bingo. But this book is a holiday read, and really December is the only time to really read it. So because of that, I am going to go with 8 Nights of Flirting by Hannah Reynolds and add this one to our TBR game. All right, there's only one book on my Kindle list that meets this prompt, and it is Air of Uncertain Magic by Charlie N. Holmberg. And you can see on the cover, definitely not horizontal text on it. So this is book 2 in the Wimberle House series, which is a historical fantasy / magical realism series. The book is about this house that had to be tamed, and the person who inherited it was getting into kind of like a lot of trouble because the house was out to basically get him, and he had to hire like a house tamer. I'm not sure what's going to happen in this second book, but it's a interesting concept for a series, so I'm looking forward to reading this one as well. So that will be our Kindle book choice. All right, let's bring up that game board and go ahead and do our fourth roll of the game. All right, things have been going well. We are now upon our danger zone. Let's see if we can get past it. Here we go. Roll number 4 is a 5. And that's our boarding pass, which means we go back to the beginning of the board. We were doing pretty good. All right. We were off to such a good start until this fourth roll, where we rolled a 5 and we landed on the boarding pass, which means we get to go all the way back to the beginning. But that's okay. We only have 3 books on here so far, and with our next turn, we actually get to use a 12-sided die instead of an 8-sided die, so things can still be okay. But what we do have to do is pull 2 books out of our series jar. All right, so this is our series jar. In here, there are books from 37 series I am prioritizing. The thing I'm excited about this is that 3 of these books already on our TBR are in this jar as well. So if we pull one of those books, that's kind of like a freebie because it will count for 2 turns. So let's hope for one of those 3. All right, here we go. Book number 1 is going to be this one here. Oh no, this is not good. This is Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is the first book in the Wheel of Time series. This book has been on my TBR twice so far. I'm actually pretty far in. I just haven't completed it yet. So maybe the third time will be the charm. I may have to like skim the first, 500 pages to make sure I know what's going on. So this is a epic fantasy series that is also a very long series, and I have definitely been enjoying reading the book. It's just, it takes a while because there's a lot of going on, as there usually is in epic fantasy series. And hopefully this time I may actually finish it because I think I only have like 200 pages left in it. So this will be going on to our TBR. Maybe I'll finish it this year finally. All right, so let's go ahead and choose our second one. All right, our second book from the series jar is going to be Murder in the White House. So this book is by Margaret Truman and is the first book in the Capital Crime series, which is a series that is set in Washington, D.C. And this book, the crime that it is solving is the strangling of Secretary of State Lansard Blaine in the Lincoln bedroom. So this will be a good book to get on the TBR because these books are usually short and are pretty quick reads. So I'm excited to kind of start this series and see if I enjoy it. Hopefully this month in December. All right, we are back at the beginning, but let's go ahead and do our 5th roll of the game. All right, we are back at the beginning of the board. Because we landed on the boarding pass, we get to move on to a D12 die. So let's go ahead and hope for some big numbers here on roll number 5. And 8. And that is red. All right, we rolled an 8. That is great because we were back at the beginning of the board, so higher number, better, obviously. And we landed on red. So in our red bag, we have prompts that have to do with the title of the book, some miscellaneous prompts, and some series prompts. Let's go ahead and mix these up and choose our next prompt of the game. All right, here we go. We're going to split the deck here, and we have a title prompt. And it is a book with a 2-word title. All right, that's a very short title. Hopefully we have some good options here. We have a very good option here, which I just thought about. That is Savage Fae by Carolyn Peckham and Suzanne Valenti, which is the second book in, I believe it's the Dark Fae series. And it is set in the Zodiac universe. And I really enjoyed, it's not the Dark Fae series, it's the Ruthless Boys series. Anyway, this book is set in a magical academy in the Zodiac universe. Not the Zodiac Academy, though. I can't think of the name right now. And it follows a young woman whose brother went to the same school and ended up dead. And now she has enrolled to try to figure out who killed her brother. And she's narrowed it down to 4 men at this school. So that is the book we're going to add to our TBR, which I'm super excited about. These are pretty quick, fast reads for me. So Savage Fae will be our book for our 5th roll. And obviously there's 2 words in the title. All right, let me look to see if I have a Kindle option. I'm not sure if I do, but let me check. All right, we actually have a bunch of choices. I've narrowed it down to 2. Honestly, I'm most likely going to read Savage Fae for this prompt, so it doesn't really matter as much which book I choose. But the 2 choices I have are Chasing Perfect by Suzanne Mallory, which is book 1 in her Fool's Gold series. It's a romance series. And this one takes place in California, where Charity Jones, who is a city planner, ends up moving into town after being hired to bring more men into town, and ends up falling in love with everything about the town, that is, except for Josh Golden, who is the town's most famous resident. So that's one option. And then our second option is Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth, which is a mystery thriller book that follows 3 women who were raised in a foster family. Their foster mom was Miss Fairchild, and a body ends up being discovered in the home that they grew up in, and they find themselves kind of thrust into the spotlight as key witnesses. That is our other option. I'm going to choose Chasing Perfect for this prompt, mostly because I know I'm going to read Savage Fae, and I rather still have a potential to read Darling Girls for a different prompt. So I'm going to throw this one on because it's kind of like a generic romance book, just in case I need a quick read if I don't get to Savage Fae. So this will be our choice for our 2-word title. All right, our stack is definitely getting bigger. That's okay. Let's bring up the game board and do a 6 roll. All right, roll number 6 is a 7. And that is orange. We just missed the boarding pass. All right, a 7. Moving right along once again, and this time we landed on orange. All right, so in here are some cover prompts, some series prompts, and some miscellaneous prompts. So let's go ahead and see what we get for our next prompt. All right, here we go. It is a cover prompt. And it is a cover with a person on it. Very broad. That's great. We like that. All right, we have some options here. We have Pirate's Life for Tea, A Pirate's Life for Tea by Rebecca Thorne. We have A Mixture of Mischief by Anna Mariano. We could again do Keepers of the Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger. So these are all parts of series. I think the one I'm going to go with, though, is going to be this one, which is A Pirate's Life for Tea by Rebecca Thorne. It's book 2 in the Tomes and Tea series. I really enjoyed book 1. It's a cozy fantasy series where the two main characters end up quitting the jobs that they had. One was a bodyguard for the queen. The other is like the highest person in the magical realm. What's it called? Magical hierarchy. There we go. And they end up opening up a bookshop and selling tea. So I'm going to add this one because I do want to get through the series. The third book's already out. So we'll put this one on our TBR, and there is definitely a person on the cover. So matches our prompt. And then the book I'm going to go with for the Kindle option is a book that I really want to get to in December. It's called Last Stop on the Winter Wonderland Express. It's by Rebecca Raisin. You can see there's a person on the cover. And this book follows Aubrey, who has just been dumped by her fiance just days before Christmas. And they have been planning on taking a honeymoon in Europe where they are going on a luxury snow train. And stopping in places that have beautiful Christmas markets like Paris and Stockholm. And now she has decided that she's going to take this trip alone. And there she finds comfort in a group of single passengers who have dubbed themselves the Unlucky in Love Travel Club. And one of those people happens to be Jasper, a travel journalist, and she starts to kind of develop feelings for him, and things go on from there. So that's going to be our Kindle book option. I love it. Just sounds like a very like festive Christmassy story, and I am excited. I'm hoping to read this during one of my holiday reading games I'm doing in December. So we are going to put this one onto our TBR. All right, let's bring up the game board for our 7th roll. All right, roll number 7 is a 1. Are you kidding me? Back to the beginning. Really, we're using a 12-sided die and we roll a 1. That was very not opportunistic because we landed on the boarding pass. So I guess we're going back to the beginning of the board and we're choosing 2 more books out of our series jar. Let's go ahead and do that. All right. Hopefully we get one of these books that we already have on our TBR. We really could use that at this point. All right, here we go. Book 1 from our series jar. Going to be The Queen's Poisoner by Jeff Wheeler. Not on our TBR yet, but definitely a series I want to read. This is book 1 in his overall universe series, which is kind of like a epic fantasy series as well. So what this book is about. This book is about the Duke of Kixkadon attempting to depose King Severin Argentine from his throne, but the Duke ends up losing and as a punishment has to give his son, Owen, to be the king's hostage. And the book seems to follow Owen, who has to learn to survive in the court of King Fountain. But then his father may have betrayed the king again, and that means that the king may end up killing Owen. So Owen has to get on the king's favorite side, so that does not happen. So that will be added to our TBR. I'm actually excited. I want to get to reading this book, and the book also starts with a Q, so that will help my alphabet book list. So we'll add this one to our TBR. And then our second book from this series jar is going to be this one right here. And it is another book I've read. I've actually read this book, which is The 13 Problems by Agatha Christie. So we gotta choose a different one out here. All right, let's try this again. There are some books in here that I've already read because I don't go through the jar if I read them for different reasons. All right, here we go. We got An Acceptable Time by Madeline L. Engel, which I actually have in a physical book. All right, here it is. An Acceptable Time by Madeline L. Engel, which is a middle grade book It's also the last book in this series, so there's a potential of me finishing 3 series this month, which is awesome. So this book follows the Murray family, and this book in particular follows Polly O'Keefe, and she wanders into a time 3,000 years before her own. And she ends up, I think, going with her friend Zachary, who is gravely ill, and Polly has to keep herself and Zachary alive until the gate reopens to bring them home. So this will be our other series book to add to our TBR. These are pretty quick reads at least, so I'm definitely happy about that. All right, at least this time we get to use a 20-sided die, so hopefully we can get around this board pretty fast. Let's bring up the game board for our 8th roll. All right, on to a 20-sided die for roll number 8. Hopefully we get some really big numbers here. 11. That is brown. All right, we got a 11. Not too bad. We'll take that. And we landed on brown. All right, so this is, again, our bag where the prompts change every month. So we have prompts that have to do with December, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and fall. All right. Whoa, about dropped them all. All right, let's split the deck here and see what our prompt is. It's another fall prompt. And it is a paranormal book. All right. We can do that. We can definitely do that. All right. I'm going to go with Ghost in the Snow by Tamara Seiler Jones. Ghosts are paranormal, I would say. And it's in the snow, so it also goes with December. So this book is a fantasy book that follows Dubert Brierly, who's the head of security at Castle Fedora, where he saves lives as head of security. But unfortunately, there's a silent killer afoot that is killing servant girls and leaving behind no clues and no witnesses except for the ghosts of the victims who Dubrick, just happens to be able to see. So he needs to figure out who is killing these girls and bring them to justice. So that will be our physical book choice for this prompt. All right. The Kindle book we're going to go with is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, which is a paranormal book as well. It says so on the description. So we're going to go with it. This book follows 16-year-old Jacob, who, after a family tragedy, sets off journeying to a remote island in Wales. And there he discovers the crumbling ruins of the Home for Peculiar Children. And as he kind of explores this home, he comes to the realization that the children may have been more than just peculiar. They may also have been dangerous and quarantined on the island for a good reason. And they may actually still be alive. So that is going to be our Kindle book choice for a paranormal book. So I'm excited about both of these. Not sure which one I'm going to read. They also seem like good winter, December reads as well. All right, let's bring up the game board. Hope for a good roll for roll number, what are we on? 9. All right, come on, 20. This is roll number 9. 20! I cannot believe that just literally happened. All right, let's move forward 20 spots. That is brown. All right, that is more like it. We got a 20. Things couldn't have gone better. We have gone past all of the tokens that could make us move backwards. So we are on a roll now, on roll number 9. And we landed on brown. So let's get that bag again and choose our next prompt. All right, here's our brown bag with our seasonal prompts in it. So let's go ahead and choose another prompt for the game. Here we go. Okay. Let's mix these up a little bit. All right, and then let's split the deck. How about right there? And this will be our prompt. It looks like it's a Sagittarius prompt. There we go. All right, and it says, a character who uses a bow and arrow. That could be difficult to find, but let's see if we can figure that one out. So for our physical book prompt, I am going to be adding Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins, which is the second book in her The Hunger Games series, which is a YA series that's set in a dystopian future where children basically get pulled in a lottery system and they have to fight each other to the deaths once a year. And the main character in this book, Katniss, is well known for her use of bow and arrows. So definitely meets the prompt. This is a reread for me, but I am excited. It's been a while since I've read this book, so I'm excited to see if I enjoy it as much as I did the first time around. So that will be our physical book choice. So for our Kindle book, we are going with Dark Frost by Jennifer Estep, which is the third book in her Mythos Academy series, which is a series that is inspired by kind of mythology from around the world. And the main character in this book is Gwen Frost, who starts attending the academy in book number 1, where she meets different people with different magical powers, such as Valkyries and Spartans. And she happens to be the only person at the academy with her type of power. And of course, the enemy of the school is out to get her, and that's kind of what the story follows. So it's a fun kind of like YA fantasy story that is a very quick read as well. So definitely a good option. And the characters in the book do use bows and arrows because that's one of the weapons that they train on in this school. So meets the prompt. So that will be our Kindle book choice for this prompt. All right, let's bring up the game board and go ahead and do our 10th roll of the game. All right, roll number 10. Let's see what we get. A 17, which means we have completed the game. All right, a 17. We have finally made it to the end. All that's left is to choose our 2 books out of our science fiction fantasy award-winning / nominee jar. So let's grab that. So in here are 70 books, give or take, that have either won or been nominated for the Hugo, Locust, Nebula, and Golden Duck Awards. So they range from middle grade all the way up to adult. Let's go ahead. Choose our 2 books. The only things they have in common is they are part of the fantasy, science fiction, speculative genre. All right, book number 1. We got 2 there. Don't choose one of them to start. All right, this one here. Here we go. Book number 1 from our jar is going to be A Canticle Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. I've not heard of that one. Let's look that up. All right, so A Canticle for Leibowitz is book 1 in the St. Leibowitz series. It was published back in 1959 and is a post-apocalyptic book. So I'm just going to read the first sentence because it's kind of hard to describe, but it says, in a nightmarish, ruined world, slowly awakening to the light after sleeping in darkness, the infant rediscoveries of science are secretly nourished by cloistered monks dedicated to the study and preservation of the relics and writings of the blessed Saint Isaac Leibowitz. And then from here, the story spans centuries of ignorance, violence, and barbarism, viewing through a sharp satirical eye the relentless progression of a human race stand by its inherent humanness to re-celebrate its grand foibles and repeat its grievous mistakes. So it's funny, stunning, and tragic is what it says. So that is an interesting choice. We'll see how the book reads. It is kind of considered a classic, so I'm excited to get to it. All right, let's see our second book for this jar pull. All right, here we go. Oops, drop one. We're gonna have to grab that. All right, and we're going with this one here. And it is Summer of Night by Dan Simmons. All right, let's see what this one's about. So this is a horror. It's book 1 in the Seasons of Horror series. Yay. All right, so this takes place in 1960 in Elm Haven, Illinois, where 5 12-year-old boys are forming bonds that a lifetime of changes will never erase. But then on the last day of school, their classmate Tubby Cook vanishes, and soon the group discovers stories of other children who once disappeared from Elm Haven. The friends begin to realize that there is a terrible evil lurking in Elm Haven, and they must be the ones to stop it. This book is long, 600 pages. Wow. All right. Well, that is our last book we'll be adding to our December TBR. So that completes our TBR. Not too bad. Well, not too bad. There is a lot of books on here. We'll see how many we get to this month. Not really going to stress out too much about it because we are going to be focusing on some holiday reads throughout the month as well. And then, like I said, in January, we'll be playing 1 weekly reading game a month that will focus on the TBR. So I am interested to see how that works out starting in January. All right. Here is our December TBR plus some additional jar pulls. Let's go ahead and go through the books and see what we'll be reading in December. All right, let's start off with our prompt cards. For a tree on the cover, we have Silver on the Tree by Suzanne Cooper or Christmas at the Lakeside Resort by Suzanne Childs. We'll see which one I end up reading. I'm not too sure on this one. For a paranormal book, we got Ghost in the Snow by Tamara Seiler Jones or Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. I'm leaning a little bit more towards Miss Peregrine's Home because I've been wanting to try this book for a while. For a book where a character uses a bow and arrow, we have Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins and Dark Frost by Jennifer Estep. This is, I could end up reading either of these books as well. I really want to read both of them. For a book with a person on the cover, we have A Pirate's Life for Tea by Rebecca Thorne. And Last Stop on the Winter Wonderland Express by Rebecca Raisin. Probably going to read the Winter Wonderland Express book because it is a holiday book. For a book that has a word to do with reading in the title, we have The Untold Story by Genevieve Cogman and Bookends by Jane Green. Probably going to read The Untold Story so I can complete this series. For a cover with writing that is not horizontal, we have Air of Uncertain Magic by Charlie N. Holmberg and 8 Nights of Flirting for Hannah Reynolds. Leaning towards 8 Nights of Flirting, again, because it's a holiday book. And then for a book with a 2-word cover, we have Savage Fae by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti, and Chasing Perfect by Suzanne Mallory. Most likely going to read Savage Fae. I'm very excited to get back into this series. All right, then for our jar pulls, starting with our series jar pulls, we have Murder in the White House by Margaret Truman, the first book in the Capital Crime series, and The Queen's Poisoner by Jeff Wheeler, the first book in his overall Muirwood series. We have The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, book 1 in the Wheel of Time series, and An Acceptable Time by Madeline L. Engel, the 4th or 5th and final book in her Time Quintet series. Then for our science fiction fantasy award-winning / nominee jar, we have Summer of Night by Dan Simmons and A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. All right, that is quite a TBR. We'll see how many books we can get through this month. So the videos I have planned for the month of December, I'm super excited about. The first week, we are going to be playing a game to complete my yearly challenges. Since this is the end of the month, we just have a couple more challenges that we need to finish up. So we'll be playing a game to do that. Then we will be playing our holiday reading game where we will be reading books that are set in and around the holidays, which super excited about. Then we'll be doing a holiday word search reading game where we will be reading books that have those words on the word search in the title of them. So excited to see how that goes. I think it went pretty good for Halloween, so I can't wait to bring out the holiday version of it. Then we are going to end the month with just a quick bookshelf scavenger hunt, which I always have a lot of fun doing. Then, of course, after that will come our January TBR game, which is crazy that we will be starting a new year when we next do our TBR game. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed playing it. I think we have a lot of interesting books on this TBR that I'm excited to read, and I can't wait to see how much I get through. Let me know what books are going to be on your December TBR, or if you've read any of these books that are on mine. Let me know what your thoughts of them are. And if you've enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you want to see future videos by me, including future TBR games and future reading game videos, please hit that subscribe button because it is free. And if you just want to let me know you've watched this video all the way through, why don't we leave a tree emoji for our prompt tree on the cover and our title Silver on the Tree. I think that will work out great. Thank you again for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in my next video. Take care. Bye.